Lawyer Elliot Hayes struggles to rebuild his life after a scandal shatters his career and reputation. Isolated and burdened by guilt, he believes his story is over until a chance encounter with June Callahan, a fiery and optimistic street artist, sets him on an unexpected path toward redemption. As Elliot uncovers the truth behind the corruption that destroyed him, he finds himself facing powerful enemies willing to do whatever it takes to silence him. Alongside June, whose own struggles mirror his in surprising ways, Elliot must decide how far he's willing to go to fight for justice, not just for himself, but for an entire community. What begins as a journey to expose the truth transforms into something far greater, a story of resilience, love, and the power of starting over. But with lives on the line and shadows closing in, will Elliot and June rise above, or will their fight consume them both? The air was sharp that November evening, the kind of chill that cut through even the heaviest coat. Elliot Hayes walked aimlessly down the streets of Chicago, his shoulders hunched against the cold wind that swept through the city. The towering skyscrapers above him were aglow with holiday lights, their golden hues reflecting off icy puddles on the sidewalk. The city hummed with life, cars honked, street vendors called out their wares, and pedestrians bustled along the streets in a rush to get somewhere warm. Elliot had nowhere to be. A little over a year ago, Elliot had been a rising star in Chicago's corporate legal world. His sharp mind and eloquence in the courtroom had earned him accolades and a six-figure salary before he turned 35. But one case had shattered it all. An embezzlement scandal involving one of his firm's top clients had spiraled out of control. Though Elliot had been unaware of the client's deceit, he became a scapegoat in the fallout. The media tore him apart. His name splashed across headlines as if he had masterminded the scheme himself. The shame was unbearable. His friends, once numerous and loyal, stopped returning his calls. His parents, conservative Midwesterners, were horrified by the disgrace. And his fiancée, Meredith, had left him days after the news broke. Now, Elliot lived in a tiny studio apartment on the outskirts of the city. The walls were bare except for a small calendar tacked above a battered desk, and the heat only worked half the time. His days were spent working part-time shifts at a hardware store. The job paid just enough to cover rent and groceries, with little left for anything else. As Elliot trudged past the diner, the smell of fresh coffee and frying bacon wafted through the air. His stomach growled, but he shook his head. He couldn't afford even a cheap meal out. Instead, he tightened his scarf and kept walking. By the time he reached his building, a gray, weather-beaten structure with peeling paint and a flickering porch light, the numbness in his fingers matched the dull ache in his chest. As he climbed the narrow stairs to his apartment, the weight of his failures pressed down on him. Inside, the single-room apartment was dimly lit by a desk lamp. Elliot kicked off his shoes and sank onto the lumpy couch. He ran his hands through his dark hair, now streaked with gray at the temples, though he was only 36. What now? He thought. Was this all there was left for him? The sound of laughter drifted up from the street below. He stood and peered out the window. Down by the corner, a small group had gathered near a wall where a woman was painting a mural. Her broad strokes of color stood out against the gray brick, forming what appeared to be a phoenix rising from flames. Elliot watched her work for a moment, captivated by her fluid movements despite the cold. She wore a thick jacket and a knit hat, her fiery red hair spilling out in loose curls. The way she focused so intently on her art made him envious. She had purpose, something he hadn't felt in months. The next morning, as Elliot walked to the bus stop, he passed by the mural again. The woman was there, crouching on a step stool as she added details to the bird's outstretched wings. She hummed softly to herself, seemingly unaware of the people passing by. Elliot hesitated before speaking. "That's impressive," he said. His voice was raspy and used to conversation. The woman looked up, startled, then smiled. "Thanks," she said, wiping paint off her gloves. "It's for the community. I like to leave a little color wherever I go." "You're doing this for free?" Elliot asked, surprised. She shrugged. "Someone donated the supplies. The rest is my time, which is free enough these days." He nodded, unsure what to say. The woman seemed to sense his discomfort. "I'm June, by the way," she said, extending her paint-speckled hand. Elliot, he replied, shaking it. Her grip was firm and warm, a contrast to the icy air. Nice to meet you, Elliot, she said. And thanks for noticing the mural. Most people just walk by without looking. Her words stayed with him as he boarded the bus. That evening, after another grueling shift at the hardware store, he passed the mural again. June was gone, but the phoenix now glowed with shades of orange and gold that seemed to flicker like real flames. Days later, Elliot found himself lingering near the mural after work. He wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the bright colors or the image of rebirth that called to him. When June appeared again, she greeted him with a cheerful wave. Hey, Elliot, back to check on my progress. He shrugged. It's a good mural, hard to ignore. She laughed. High praise from the man who looks like he carries the weight of the world on his shoulders. Elliot stiffened, but she continued before he could respond. Let me guess, bad week? Or bad year? Bad everything, he admitted. It was the first time he'd said it aloud, and the words felt heavy. June's expression softened. You're not the first person to feel like that, you know? But life has a funny way of surprising you. Sometimes it's in the smallest ways. Her optimism irritated him at first. How could someone who clearly wasn't wealthy or living in luxury be so hopeful? But as the days passed, he found himself drawn to her warmth and determination. She shared her story in pieces: how she had dropped out of art school to raise her younger brother after their parents died, how she had struggled to make ends meet as a freelance artist, and how she had found joy in creating public art for others to enjoy. I used to think success meant a fancy career and a big house, she said one evening as they sat on a nearby bench. But now I think it's about leaving the world a little better than you found it. Elliot scoffed. It's not that simple. No, it's not, June agreed. But it's worth trying. One night, as Elliot was walking home, he found a bag of groceries outside his door. There was no note, but inside were essentials: bread, milk, canned soup, and even a small carton of fresh strawberries. Confused, he carried the bag inside. The next day, he asked his neighbor if they had seen anything. Nope, the elderly woman said, shaking her head. When he mentioned it to June later, she simply smiled. Maybe someone noticed you needed a little help, she said. Why would anyone do that? Elliot asked. Why not? June replied. Kindness doesn't need a reason. For the first time in months, Elliot felt something stir inside him: gratitude, yes, but also curiosity. Who had left the groceries? And why did June's words resonate so deeply? As he watched her paint, he realized the mural wasn't just an image of a phoenix. It was a mirror, reflecting the possibility of starting over. The following weekend, June invited Elliot to help her finish the mural. I could use an extra pair of hands, she said with a grin. Elliot hesitated, then agreed. It was a small step, but as he dipped the brush in a vibrant paint and added streaks of light to the phoenix's wings, he felt something shift. The colors seemed to seep into him, washing away some of the gray that had clouded his life for so long. When they finished, June stepped back and admired their work. Not bad, partner, she said, giving him a playful nudge. Elliot smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he believed her. The mural had changed everything. Not immediately, but in small, subtle ways that Elliot didn't notice at first. It wasn't just the act of painting, it was the way June spoke to him while they worked, her words seeping into his mind like drops of rain into dry earth. You're better at this than you think, she had said, watching as he carefully added streaks of blue to the phoenix's wings. It's all about finding your rhythm. The rest follows. At first, Elliot dismissed her compliments as politeness. But by the time they packed up for the evening, he felt lighter, as if some of the weight he'd been carrying had been lifted. The next morning, Elliot left his apartment early to catch the bus to work. On his way past the mural, he stopped to admire it. It was finished now, vibrant and alive against the dull gray brick of the building. The phoenix looked as though it might leap from the wall and take flight. Several people paused to snap photos, their faces lighting up as they took in the bright colors. Elliot felt an unfamiliar pang of pride. He'd helped create that. At the hardware store, the hours dragged by as they usually did. Customers came and went, most of them polite but distant. Elliot stocked shelves and rang up purchases, his mind wandering back to the mural. On his lunch break, he found himself scrolling through his phone, searching for local art exhibits. It was something he hadn't done in years back when he and Meredith used to spend weekends exploring galleries together. The memory stung, but it didn't overwhelm him like it used to. When his shift ended, Elliot walked out into the crisp evening air, clutching his coat tightly around him. He debated going straight home, but his feet carried him toward the mural instead. June was there, as he'd hoped, sitting cross-legged on the ground with a sketch pad balanced on her knees. Her fiery red hair glowed in the golden light of the setting sun. "You're back," she said, looking up with a grin. "Just passing by," Elliot replied, though they both knew it wasn't true. June patted the space on the ground next to her. "See, I'm working on something new." Curiosity got the better of him, and he joined her. She tilted the sketch pad toward him, revealing the rough outline of a tree with twisting branches. "It's for another mural," she explained. "This one's going on the side of the library. I'm thinking of making it a tree of life, something that shows growth and resilience." Elliot studied the sketch, admiring the way the branches seemed to reach for the sky. "It's beautiful," he said, meaning it. June glanced at him, her expression thoughtful. "You know, you've got an eye for this stuff. Ever thought about doing something creative?" Elliot laughed bitterly. "I'm not exactly the artistic type." "Everyone's got something," June said, tapping her pencil against the sketch pad. "Maybe it's not art, but there's something in you waiting to grow. You just have to stop holding it back." Her words struck a chord he didn't expect. He wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, but instead, he asked, "What made you decide to do this?" "Painting murals, I mean." June leaned back against the wall, her gaze distant. "When I was a kid, I used to draw all the time. My mom said I could make anything come to life with a pencil and paper. But after she died, everything changed. I had to grow up fast, take care of my brother. Art was the only thing that kept me going." Her voice softened. "Eventually, I realized it wasn't just about making pretty pictures. It was about creating something that could make people feel something: hope, joy, connection. That's what kept me going." Elliot stared at her, struck by the quiet strength in her words. He wanted to ask more, but a sudden gust of wind cut through the alley, making them both shivers. "Come on," June said, standing and brushing off her jeans. "Let's grab a coffee." "My treat." Elliot hesitated. "I can't." "No arguments," June interrupted, holding up a hand. "Consider it payment for helping with the mural." They ended up in a small cafe a few blocks away. The walls were covered in mismatched art, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. June ordered a latte, while Elliot settled for plain black coffee. As they sat by the window, Elliot found himself relaxing for the first time in months. June was easy to talk to, her laughter infectious. She shared stories about her brother, her struggles to make ends meet, and her dreams of one day opening an art studio. "What about you?" she asked, leaning forward. "What did you want to do before everything?" Elliot hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. But something about June made it easy to talk. "I wanted to make a difference," he admitted. "When I went into law, I thought I could help people, fight for justice, that kind of thing. But somewhere along the way, it became about climbing the ladder, winning cases, making money. I lost sight of what really mattered." June nodded, her expression sympathetic. "And now?" "I don't know," Elliot said honestly. "I feel like I'm stuck in the ashes of my old life, and I don't know how to get out." June smiled gently. "Maybe you just need a spark." Her words stayed with him long after they left the cafe. That night, as he lay in bed, Elliot thought about the phoenix on the mural. It had risen from the flames, reborn and stronger than before. Was it possible for him to do the same? The next morning, Elliot woke with an unfamiliar sense of purpose. He spent his day off cleaning his apartment, something he hadn't bothered to do in weeks. As he scrubbed the tiny kitchen counter, he realized he felt lighter, as though the act of clearing away the clutter had done the same for his mind. That evening, he called June. "I was thinking about your tree mural," he said. "If you need help, I'm in." June laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "I was hoping you'd say that." They spent the next few days working on the new mural together. This time, Elliot felt more confident with the brush, his movements sure as he added vibrant green leaves to the tree's branches. "You're a natural," June said one afternoon, stepping back to admire their progress. Elliot shook his head, but he couldn't deny the sense of satisfaction that came with seeing the mural take shape. For the first time in what felt like forever, he was part of something bigger than himself. As they packed up for the day, June turned to him with a thoughtful look. "You know, Elliot, you're not stuck. You've just been afraid to take the first step." Her words hit him like a bolt of lightning. She was right. He'd been so consumed by fear of failing again, of being judged, of not being enough that he'd paralyzed himself. That night, Elliot sat at his desk and opened his laptop. He began researching community organizations, looking for ways to use his legal skills to help those who couldn't afford representation. It wasn't much, but it was a start, and for the first time in years, he felt like he was moving forward. The following week, Elliot Hayes found himself standing outside an unfamiliar building, a modest nonprofit office tucked between a laundromat and a florist. The sign above the door read, "Chicago Legal Aid and Advocacy Center." He adjusted the collar of his coat and took a deep breath before stepping inside. The air was warm, a contrast to the chill outside, and the faint smell of coffee lingered. A receptionist greeted him with a kind smile. "Hi, can I help you?" Elliot hesitated, the words catching in his throat. For a moment, he questioned why he was here. But then he remembered June's encouragement, "You just need a spark," and steadied himself. "I'm here to see if you're taking volunteers," he said. The receptionist gestured toward a chair. "Sure, take a seat. I'll let someone know you're here." Minutes later, Elliot was sitting across from Amanda Reeves, the center's director, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a firm handshake. She listened intently as Elliot explained his background, his voice tinged with hesitation as he recounted his fall from grace. Amanda leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "Corporate law, huh? Bit of a leap to nonprofit work." "I know," Elliot admitted, "but I want to make a difference. I've seen what happens when people don't have the resources to fight back. I can help. I just need a chance." Amanda studied him for a long moment. Finally, she nodded. "We could use the help. The caseload is overwhelming, and we're short on lawyers. But let me be clear, we're not fancy. No big salaries, no corner offices. Just long hours and hard work. Can you handle that?" Elliot nodded, relief washing over him. Absolutely. When he left the office that afternoon, a faint sense of hope had taken root. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was taking steps, small ones, but steps nonetheless towards something better. That evening, Elliot met June at the site of her latest mural. The tree of life was nearly complete, its branches stretching toward the sky, vibrant with greens, yellows, and blues. "How did it go?" she asked, wiping paint off her hands as he approached. "They said yes," Elliot replied, a small smile tugging at his lips. June beamed. "I knew they would. You've got that look like someone who's ready to take on the world." "I'm not sure about the whole world," Elliot said, chuckling. "But it's a start." As they worked side by side, the conversation turned to their plans for the future. June spoke of her dream to open a community art studio, a place where kids from underprivileged neighborhoods could learn to paint and express themselves. "You should do it," Elliot said, pausing to examine the mural. June shook her head. "It's not that simple. Studio space costs money, and I'm barely scraping by as it is." "You'll find a way," Elliot said, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. "You always do." June smiled softly but said nothing, her focus returning to the mural. The next morning, Elliot's first day at the Legal Aid Center began with a case that struck closer to home than he expected. A single mother, Carmen Lopez, was facing eviction from her apartment after her landlord raised the rent without notice. "She's been living there for 6 years," Amanda explained as she handed Elliot the file. "Paid her rent on time every month. But now the landlord wants to flip the building for profit and is pushing tenants out." Elliot nodded, scanning the documents. "Do we have anything to work with?" "There are some tenant protection laws we can leverage," Amanda said. "But it'll take some creative argumentation." As Elliot dove into the case, he found himself rediscovering a part of himself he thought was gone. The rush of strategizing, the satisfaction of building a solid argument. It felt familiar, almost like coming home. When Carmen arrived for a meeting, Elliot greeted her warmly and explained the legal options available to her. She listened intently, her face a mixture of hope and worry. "Do you think we have a chance?" she asked, clutching the strap of her worn handbag. "We do," Elliot said firmly. "And I'll do everything I can to help." Later that week, Elliot attended a fundraising gala at June's insistence. The event was hosted by one of his former colleagues, Marcus Whitmore, a name that made Elliot's stomach tighten with unease. "You need to face your past, Elliot," June had said when she invited him. "Besides, it's a chance to network. You never know who might want to support a good cause." The gala was held in a grand ballroom, its chandeliers glittering with soft light. Elliot wore his only suit, a dark gray number that had seen better days, while June dazzled in a simple yet elegant green dress. As they entered the room, heads turned mostly toward June, who carried herself with effortless grace. Elliot felt out of place, but June's presence steadied him. "You'll be fine," she whispered, looping her arm through his. The evening passed in a blur of polite conversation and glasses of champagne. Elliot avoided Marcus until he had no choice. "Elliot Hayes," Marcus said, his voice dripping with faux warmth as they crossed paths near the bar. "I almost didn't recognize you." Elliot forced a tight smile. "Marcus, I heard about your situation," Marcus continued, swirling his drink. "Unfortunate, really. But I suppose even the best of us can fall from grace." Elliot bristled but kept his tone even. "Some of us are learning to rise again." Marcus chuckled, but there was an edge to his laughter. "Careful where you step. The climb back up can be dangerous." As Marcus walked away, Elliot's hands clenched into fists. June appeared at his side, her eyes narrowing. "What was that about?" she asked. "Nothing good," Elliot muttered. But Marcus's words lingered. That night, Elliot couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his downfall than he'd realized. He opened his laptop and began searching through old emails and case files, piecing together fragments of conversations and documents. What he found sent a chill down his spine. Subtle but damning patterns began to emerge, connections between Marcus, the client at the center of the scandal, and other powerful players in the corporate world. Elliot leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. If Marcus had been involved in orchestrating the scandal, it wasn't just about greed. It was about power, about silencing anyone who got in the way. The realization filled him with equal parts anger and determination. He had spent months blaming himself for everything that happened, but now he saw the truth. He had been a pawn in a larger game. The next day, Elliot shared his findings with June over coffee. She listened intently, her expression growing more serious as he laid out the details. "This is big, Elliot," she said. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," Elliot admitted. "But I can't ignore it." June reached across the table, placing a hand on his. "You don't have to face this alone. Whatever you decide, I'm here." Her words steadied him, and for the first time in years, Elliot felt like he wasn't fighting an uphill battle on his own. As he walked home that evening, the city lights twinkling around him, Elliot realized that his journey was no longer just about redemption. It was about uncovering the truth and fighting for the justice he had once believed in. Elliot stared at the notes spread across his tiny desk. His laptop cast a faint glow in the dimly lit room, illuminating columns of connections he'd painstakingly mapped out. Names, dates, and financial transactions formed a web that pointed to one undeniable truth. The embezzlement scandal that had destroyed his career was part of a larger conspiracy orchestrated by some of the city's most powerful people. At the center of it all was Marcus Whitmore. The revelation was sobering. Elliot's mind swirled with questions. How deep did this go? Who else had been complicit? And how could he possibly expose the truth without risking everything? His phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was June. "Hey," she said when he picked up. "You sound tense. Still working on whatever it is you're working on?" Elliot glanced at the wall clock. It was nearly midnight. "I found something, June. Something big. Want to talk about it?" He hesitated, but the thought of sorting through the chaos in his head alone was unbearable. "Yeah, can you come over?" 20 minutes later, June arrived, carrying a thermos of coffee and a bag of pastries. Fuel for the night, she said with a grin, setting them on the table. Elliot couldn't help but smile. Her presence had a way of calming him, grounding him in moments when the weight of the world felt too much. He explained what he had uncovered, showing her the evidence he had pieced together. June leaned over the desk, her green eyes scanning the documents with surprising focus. "This isn't just big," she said after a moment. "This is explosive. If this gets out, it could destroy Marcus and a lot of other people." "That's what scares me," Elliot admitted. "These aren't just powerful people. They're ruthless. They ruined my life once. Who's to say they won't do it again?" June straightened and crossed her arms. "Maybe they will. But if you don't do something, they'll keep ruining other people's lives. Like Carmen." Her words struck a chord. Carmen Lopez, the tenant Elliot was representing at the Legal Aid Center, had become a face for everyone who suffered under the weight of greed and corruption. She was fighting for her home, for her son, and for a chance to live with dignity. "You're right," Elliot said. "But I can't do this alone." "You're not alone," June said firmly. "I'll help. Whatever you need, I'm in." For the next several days, Elliot and June worked tirelessly. June used her connections in the community to track down potential whistleblowers, former employees, overlooked tenants, and others who had been hurt by the same system. One of those connections led them to Henry Adler, a former financial analyst who had worked under Marcus years ago. Henry was hesitant at first, his gaze darting nervously as they met him at a quiet diner. "I don't want trouble," Henry said, stirring his coffee. "I've moved on. I have a family to think about." "I understand," Elliot said, his voice steady but imploring. "But what happened wasn't just wrong, it destroyed lives. And it's still happening. You can help stop it." Henry hesitated, then let out a long sigh. "All right, but I want anonymity. I'll share what I know, but my name stays out of it." With Henry's information, the puzzle became clearer. Marcus and his allies had orchestrated a scheme that funneled money from clients into shadow accounts, using Elliot as a scapegoat when questions arose. Late one evening, as they reviewed their findings in June's cramped studio, Elliot paused and leaned back in his chair. "You know," he said, glancing at her, "you're surprisingly good at this. Tracking people down, making them talk." June smirked. "I'm an artist, Elliot. Observation is my superpower." "More like persistence," he said with a chuckle. "I don't know what I'd do without you." June's expression softened. "You'd find a way. But I'm glad to be here." Their eyes met, and for a moment the room felt still. Elliot felt a strange warmth bloom in his chest, a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, something he hadn't felt in years. He cleared his throat and looked away. "We're getting close," he said, gesturing to the documents. "We just need to figure out how to present this without getting crushed." "That," June said, "is where your legal skills come in." The next day, Elliot brought his findings to Amanda Reeves at the Legal Aid Center. She listened carefully as he laid out the evidence, her sharp eyes narrowing as she processed the scale of the conspiracy. "This is serious," Amanda said. "If we go public with this, the backlash will be massive." "I know," Elliot said, "but it needs to come out. These people can't keep getting away with this." Amanda tapped her pen against the desk, deep in thought. "We'll need to be strategic. Media involvement, airtight documentation, maybe even law enforcement cooperation. Are you ready for that kind of fight?" Elliot hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." Amanda's gaze softened. "Good, because you're not fighting it alone." Later that evening, Elliot returned to the studio to share the news with June. She was working on a new mural, a vibrant depiction of interconnected hands reaching toward a glowing light. "Looks amazing," Elliot said, watching her from the doorway. June turned and smiled. "Thanks. It's for the community center. I thought they could use something uplifting." As she stepped back to examine her work, she glanced at Elliot. "You look different. Lighter." "I think I'm starting to believe," he said, "that I can actually do something good." June smiled. "Told you." For the first time in months, Elliot felt a flicker of optimism. The road ahead was daunting, but he wasn't walking it alone. The next morning, Elliot and Amanda met with a local journalist who had a reputation for exposing corruption. David Turner was a grizzled veteran of investigative reporting, his notebook filled with decades of scandals he had helped bring to light. This is big, David said after reviewing the evidence. If you're willing to go on record, we can make this public. But you need to be prepared this will put a target on your back. Elliot glanced at Amanda, who nodded in support. Then he thought of June, her quiet strength and unwavering belief in him. I'm ready, Elliot said. As the meeting ended, David shook his hand. This is brave, Hayes. Most people wouldn't have the guts. It's not just about me, Elliot replied. It's about justice. For everyone they hurt. That evening, Elliot returned to the mural, where June was putting the finishing touches on the glowing light at the center of the design. It's done, he said, leaning against the wall. What's done? She asked, stepping down from her ladder. I'm going public, Elliot said. The journalist is going to run the story. Everything we found, it's all going out there. June's face lit up with pride. That's incredible, Elliot. Terrifying is more like it, he said with a wry smile. June stepped closer, her expression softening. You're doing the right thing. That's what matters. As they stood together, the mural behind them, Elliot realized how far he'd come. He wasn't the broken man he'd been months ago, drowning in shame and regret. He was someone fighting for something bigger than himself. And for the first time, he felt like he was finally rising from the ashes. The morning the story broke, Elliot Hayes sat in his tiny kitchen, gripping a cup of coffee that had gone cold. The article was already making waves online. Corruption at the top corporate power players exposed. David Turner had spared no detail. The piece outlined the intricate scheme Marcus Whitmore and his associates had orchestrated, complete with the evidence Elliot had provided. The article even included statements from anonymous whistleblowers, including Henry Adler, painting a damning picture of greed and exploitation. As Elliot scrolled through the comments section, his stomach churned. Supportive messages mixed with harsh skepticism. Some praised his bravery, while others accused him of seeking revenge or attention. A knock at the door broke his focus. Elliot opened it to find June, holding a steaming takeout bag. Thought you could use breakfast, she said, stepping inside. You have no idea, Elliot replied, managing a small smile as he took the bag. They sat at his cluttered table, sharing scrambled eggs and toast while June scrolled through her phone. It's everywhere, she said, glancing up at him. You've started something big. That's what I'm afraid of, Elliot admitted. The backlash is already rolling in. Marcus isn't going to sit back and let this ruin him. June set her fork down, her expression serious. You knew this wouldn't be easy, Elliot. But you're not doing this alone. Amanda, the Legal Aid Center, the whistleblowers, they're all behind you. And so am I. Her unwavering support steadied him. Thanks, June. I don't think I'd have made it this far without you. You would have, she said with a smile. You just needed a push. Later that day, Elliot met Amanda at the Legal Aid Center to discuss the fallout from the article. The office was buzzing with activity, phones ringing off the hook as reporters and concerned citizens called in. People are paying attention, Amanda said as they sat in her cramped office. That's a good thing, but it also means Marcus is going to fight back hard. He's already released a statement denying everything and accusing you of fabricating evidence. I expected that, Elliot said. What's our next move? We need to stay ahead, Amanda said. David's article was just the start. We'll file formal complaints with the SEC and other regulatory bodies. And we'll need to prepare for the possibility of a legal counterattack. Elliot nodded, but the weight of the situation pressed on him. He knew Marcus wouldn't just fight this in court, he'd use every resource at his disposal to protect himself, including personal attacks. That night, Elliot met June at her studio, seeking solace in the vibrant energy of her space. The mural she'd been working on for the community center was complete now, a powerful image of interconnected hands reaching toward a radiant light. Finished it today, June said, gesturing to the painting as Elliot stepped inside. It's going up tomorrow. It's beautiful, Elliot said, his voice full of admiration. It's exactly what this community needs right now. June tilted her head, studying him. What about you? How are you holding up? Elliot sighed, sinking into a chair. It feels like I'm standing on a cliff, waiting to see if the ground beneath me will give way. I'm not just risking myself, June. If Marcus comes after the center or the people helping me, I don't know if I can live with that. June knelt beside him, her gaze steady. You're fighting for something that matters, Elliot. People like Marcus count on fear to keep them in power. But you're not afraid anymore. That's why they're scared of you. Her words struck a chord, and Elliot felt a flicker of determination. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for justice, for people like Carmen and Henry who had suffered in silence. The next day, the mural unveiling at the community center drew a small crowd. Families, local artists, and even a few reporters gathered to admire June's work. The mural seemed to glow in the late afternoon sun, its message of unity and resilience radiating hope. As Elliot watched June address the crowd, he couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. She spoke with passion about the power of art to bring people together, her words resonating with everyone present. Afterward, a woman approached Elliot. "You're the lawyer from the article, right?" she asked. "Yes," Elliot said cautiously. "My name's Rosa," she said, clutching her young daughter's hand. "I just wanted to thank you. What you're doing, it gives people like me hope. My landlord has been trying to push us out for months, but after reading about you, I feel like I can fight back." Elliot was taken aback, but he managed to smile. "You're not alone, Rosa. There are people who can help." As Rosa walked away, Elliot turned to June. "That's why we're doing this," he said softly. June smiled. "Exactly." That evening, Elliot returned to his apartment to find an envelope slipped under his door. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed message. "Drop this now, or you'll regret it." His heart pounded as he scanned the note. There was no signature, but the threat was clear. Elliot immediately called Amanda, who urged him to file a police report. "We knew this might happen," she said, "but we're not backing down." The note shook Elliot, but it also solidified his resolve. Marcus and his allies were feeling the pressure, and they were resorting to intimidation to silence him. The next day, Elliot received a call from Henry Adler. "We need to meet," Henry said, his voice tense. "Something's comes up." They met at a small diner, where Henry slid a folder across the table. "This is from my old files," he said. "It's more proof emails, financial records, but it also implicates someone else." Elliot opened the folder, his breath catching as he saw the name, Theodore Whitmore. Marcus's father, a retired corporate magnate who still wielded significant influence behind the scenes. "This changed everything," Elliot said, his mind racing. "If Theodore was involved, this goes even deeper than we thought." Henry nodded grimly. "Be careful, Elliot. These people don't play fair." As Elliot left the diner, the weight of the revelation pressed down on him. He was uncovering more than he'd ever anticipated, and the stakes were higher than ever. When he told June that evening, she listened intently, her brow furrowed. "This isn't just about Marcus anymore," she said. "You're exposing a system, a whole network of corruption." Elliot nodded, the enormity of the situation sinking in. "I just hope we can see this through." June placed a hand on his arm, her touch grounding him. "We will," she said, "one step at a time." As the night deepened, Elliot sat by the window, staring out at the city lights. The road ahead was daunting, but he wasn't alone. With June's support and the growing momentum of the truth, he felt a glimmer of hope. The morning after Henry Adler handed over the damning folder, Elliot sat at his desk, poring over the documents. His hands trembled slightly as he flipped through email chains, spreadsheets, and financial records that implicated Marcus Whitmore's father, Theodore, in the scandal. Theodore Whitmore had always been a towering figure in Chicago's corporate world. Even in retirement, his influence was palpable. The idea that Theodore had orchestrated or even tacitly allowed such corruption to flourish was both shocking and terrifying. Elliot's phone buzzed. It was Amanda Reeves from the Legal Aid Center. "You're not going to believe this," she said, her voice laced with urgency. "Marcus just filed a defamation lawsuit against you." Elliot leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He'd expected retaliation, but this was fast. "What's his angle?" "He's claiming the evidence you gave to David Turner is fabricated." "It's a classic intimidation tactic," Amanda replied. "He's trying to discredit you before the truth can gain more traction." Elliot rubbed his temples. "What's our next move?" "We counter with more evidence," Amanda said firmly. "Theodore's involvement changes everything. We'll file formal complaints with regulatory bodies today. If we keep the pressure on, Marcus won't be able to maintain his facade for long." "Got it," Elliot said, though the weight of the situation bore heavily on him. That evening, June arrived at Elliot's apartment with takeout and a determined look in her eyes. "You've been quiet all day," she said, setting the bag of food on the table. "What's going on?" Elliot gestured toward the folder on his desk. "Marcus filed a lawsuit, and now Theodore's name is in the mix. This is spiraling faster than I expected." June pulled out 2 containers of noodles and handed one to him. "Spiraling is good," she said between bites. "It means they're scared. You're making an impact." Elliot smiled faintly. "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple," June admitted. "But that doesn't mean it's not worth it." Her confidence in him never wavered, and for that, Elliot was grateful. As they ate, they discussed strategies for handling the lawsuit and the broader implications of Theodore's involvement. "You're building something bigger than a case," June said. "You're building momentum. People are paying attention now. They're seeing that the powerful can't always get away with this." Her words gave him strength. 2 days later, Amanda called Elliot with unexpected news. "The SEC has opened an investigation into Marcus and Theodore," she said. Theodore's name in those documents lit a fire under them. "That's a win," Elliot said cautiously. "It is," Amanda agreed. "But it also means they'll come at you even harder now. Be ready." Elliot spent the rest of the day preparing. He reached out to David Turner, who agreed to write a follow-up piece focusing on Theodore. He met with Amanda to refine their legal strategy and ensure the whistleblower's anonymity was protected. But as the pressure mounted, Elliot began to feel the strain. He hadn't slept well in weeks, and the constant vigilance was taking its toll. That evening, June found him slumped over his desk, staring blankly at the mountain of paperwork in front of him. "Elliot," she said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. He looked up, his eyes tired. "What if I'm not strong enough for this?" June knelt beside him, her gaze steady. "You are. You've come this far, Elliot. You're not the same person you were when this started. You're stronger now, and you're not alone." Her words, simple yet powerful, grounded him. The following week, the pressure on Marcus intensified. The SEC investigation made headlines, and Theodore Whitmore's carefully curated public image began to crumble. At the same time, Marcus escalated his attacks on Elliot, accusing him of being a disgruntled ex-lawyer seeking revenge. At a gala hosted by the city's elite that Friday night, tensions came to a head. Elliot and June attended, not to mingle, but to keep a pulse on the opposition. The ballroom shimmered with opulence, crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow, and the hum of conversation filled the air. As they entered, Elliot spotted Marcus across the room, his polished smile masking a storm of tension. Beside him stood Theodore, whose stern expression betrayed his discomfort. "They don't look happy," June whispered, her green dress catching the light as they made their way toward a quieter corner. "They shouldn't be," Elliot replied. The night unfolded with calculated politeness, the usual air of luxury soured by whispers about the SEC investigation. Eventually, Marcus approached. His smile was sharp, his voice cold. "Elliot Hayes, how bold of you to show your face here." "I could say the same," Elliot replied evenly. Marcus leaned in, his tone low and threatening. "You think you've won because of a few headlines? You're nothing but a washed-up lawyer clinging to relevance. This will ruin you." Before Elliot could respond, June stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. "Funny how scared you seem for someone so untouchable," she said coolly. Marcus's smile faltered, but before he could retort, Theodore joined them. "Enough," Theodore said, his voice gravelly, his sharp eyes fixed on Elliot. "You don't know what you're meddling with, son. This isn't a fight you can win." "I'm not fighting alone," Elliot replied, his voice steady. "And this isn't just about me. It's about everyone you've hurt." Theodore's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He turned and walked away, leaving Marcus glaring after him. As the gala continued, Elliot and June quietly slipped out, their resolve stronger than ever. The next morning, Elliot received an unexpected call. "You're not going to believe this," Amanda said, her tone a mix of shock and satisfaction. "Theodore just announced he's stepping down from all his corporate boards. He's distancing himself from Marcus." Elliot felt a flicker of triumph. "It's a crack in the armor," he said. "A big one," Amanda replied. "But don't get comfortable. Marcus won't go down without a fight. That evening, Elliot met June at her studio. The mural for the community center had become a symbol of their fight, a reminder of resilience and unity. "We're making progress," Elliot said as he helped her clean brushes. June smiled, her eyes full of pride. "Because you didn't give up." Elliot glanced at her, his chest tightening with gratitude. "Because I had you." For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of the journey ahead balanced by the strength they found in each other. As the city lights flickered outside, Elliot felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, he believed they could win. The fallout from Theodore Whitmore's resignation rippled through Chicago's corporate elite like a lightning strike. News outlets speculated on the reasons behind his sudden decision, linking it to the ongoing SEC investigation and Marcus Whitmore's increasingly precarious position. For Elliot, it was a bittersweet victory. Theodore's withdrawal signaled that cracks were forming in the foundation of the Whitmore empire, but Marcus's retaliatory moves grew more aggressive. At the Legal Aid Center, Amanda Reeves updated Elliot on the lawsuit Marcus had filed against him. "He's doubling down," she said, sliding a thick stack of documents across her desk. Elliot leafed through the paperwork, his jaw tightening. Marcus's legal team was using every tool in the arsenal: character attacks, demands for discovery, and financial pressure. "He's trying to bleed you dry," Amanda said, her tone grim. "He knows you don't have the resources to fight this indefinitely." Elliot nodded, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "Then we keep going. We have to stay ahead of him." Amanda's expression softened. "You're taking on a lot, Elliot. Don't forget to take care of yourself." That evening, Elliot met June at the community center. Her mural had been unveiled days ago, and the response had been overwhelming. Families stopped to admire the vibrant image of hands reaching toward light, many taking photos to share online. "Everyone's talking about it," Elliot said as they walked through the center's main hall. June smiled, her face lighting up. "It's not just a mural. It's a reminder that we're stronger together." They stopped near the main office, where a group of children were gathered around an art station June had set up. She waved to them before turning back to Elliot. "You look tired," she said, her voice tinged with concern. "I am," Elliot admitted. "Marcus's legal team is coming at me hard, and now Theodore stepping down has stirred things up even more." June placed a hand on his arm. "You've already come so far. Don't let them scare you into stopping now." Her unwavering confidence bolstered him. "Thanks, June. I don't know how I'd do this without you." "You'd find a way," she said with a smile. "But I'm glad I can be here." The next morning, Elliot received an unexpected call from David Turner, the investigative journalist who had published the initial article. "You might want to sit down for this," David said. Elliot frowned, gripping his phone tighter. "What's going on?" "I got a tip," David said. "Someone from Marcus's inner circle wants to talk. They claim to have information that could blow this whole thing wide open." Elliot's pulse quickened. "Who is it?" "They didn't give a name," David said. "But they want to meet in person. Tonight." A knot of unease formed in Elliot's stomach. This could be the breakthrough they needed or a trap. "Do you think it's legit?" Elliot asked. "There's only one way to find out," David replied. That evening, Elliot and David arrived at a dimly lit cafe on the outskirts of the city. June had insisted on coming along, unwilling to let Elliot face the unknown alone. The three of them sat at a corner table, scanning the room as they waited. After 20 tense minutes, a man in his mid-40s approached. His face was partially obscured by the hood of his jacket, but his eyes darted nervously as he sat down. "My name is Alan," the man said, his voice low. "I used to work in Marcus's financial department." Elliot exchanged a glance with David, who nodded for him to continue. "I handle transfers, offshore accounts, that sort of thing," Alan said. "Marcus trusted me because I was discreet. But when the SEC started sniffing around, he burned everyone who might talk." "Why come forward now?" Elliot asked. Alan's jaw tightened. "Because I'm tired of being scared. I have kids, and I don't want them to grow up in a world where people like Marcus can do whatever they want." Alan slid a flash drive across the table. "This has everything. Wire transfers, account numbers, emails. It's enough to bury Marcus and Theodore." Elliot hesitated, glancing at June. Her expression was a mixture of caution and encouragement. "This is huge," David said, pocketing the drive. "If this checks out, it's game over for Marcus." But as Alan stood to leave, he turned back to Elliot. "Be careful," he said. "Marcus doesn't play fair. He'll come for you if he thinks you're a threat." The following day, Amanda, Elliot, and David reviewed the contents of the flash drive. The evidence was staggering, millions of dollars funneled through offshore accounts, implicating not only Marcus and Theodore, but also other powerful executives. "This is it," Amanda said, her voice steady. "This is enough to bring them down." But as they strategized their next steps, Elliot's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Stop now, or you'll regret it." His chest tightened. The threats were becoming more direct. June found him that evening, pacing his apartment. "What happened?" she asked. Elliot showed her the text, his jaw clenched. "They're trying to scare me into backing down." June crossed her arms, her gaze fierce. "And are you?" "No," Elliot said firmly. "But I can't put you or anyone else in danger." June stepped closer, her expression softening. "You're not putting me in danger, Elliot. I'm here because I choose to be, and I'm not going anywhere." Her words steadied him, and for a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of their fight shared between them. The next morning, Elliot filed a formal complaint with the SEC, bolstered by the new evidence. The media caught wind of the development, and the story dominated headlines. Meanwhile, Marcus's lawyers escalated their attacks, filing additional motions to discredit Elliot and his allies. But cracks were beginning to show. Theodore Whitmore, once untouchable, remained silent, his absence speaking volumes. At the Legal Aid Center, Carmen Lopez stopped by to thank Elliot. "I heard what you're doing," she said, her voice full of gratitude. "Because of you, my landlord backed down. My son and I get to keep our home." Elliot felt a lump in his throat. "You don't owe me anything, Carmen. This fight is for all of us." That evening, Elliot met June at the community center, where she was preparing for an art workshop. "You look lighter," she said, studying him. Carmen stopped by, Elliot said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "She reminded me why we're doing this." June returned his smile, her eyes full of pride. "Because it matters, and because you're strong enough to see it through." As the city lights sparkled outside, Elliot felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead was still fraught with challenges, but with June by his side, he believed they could face anything. The evidence Alan had provided became a weapon that sent shockwaves through Marcus Whitmore's empire. News outlets published exposés with increasingly damning details. The SEC announced a formal investigation into Theodore Whitmore's offshore accounts. And yet, as the walls closed in around Marcus, his counterattacks became more vicious. Elliot sat in Amanda Reeves's cramped office, the air heavy with tension. "This isn't just a legal battle anymore," Amanda said, flipping through a thick stack of new filings from Marcus's lawyers. "They're throwing everything at your allegations of misconduct, claims of fabricated evidence. It's a full-scale smear campaign." Elliot sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I expected as much." Amanda looked up, her expression serious. "It's more than that, Elliot. They're targeting you personally. If we don't manage this carefully, they'll try to ruin what's left of your reputation." Elliot nodded, but the weight of her words pressed heavily on him. Later that day, Elliot met June at the community center. She was setting up for an art workshop, her vibrant mural of interconnected hands serving as a backdrop for the tables covered in paints and brushes. "Rough day?" she asked, glancing at him as he walked in. "You could say that," Elliot replied, slumping into a chair. "Amanda thinks Marcus is trying to destroy me." June stopped what she was doing and sat across from him. "You're already one step ahead of him, Elliot. He's fighting to maintain a facade, but you're fighting for something real. People see that." Her words were meant to comfort, but Elliot couldn't shake the doubt creeping in. "What if I lose everything again?" June leaned forward, her green eyes steady. "Then you rebuild, and this time you won't do it alone." The simplicity of her response steadied him. That evening, Elliot returned to his apartment to find another envelope slipped under his door. Inside was a grainy photo of him leaving the Legal Aid Center, accompanied by a typed note. "This won't end well for you." His chest tightened as he read the words. The threat felt more personal this time, like a shadow closing in. Elliot immediately called Amanda. "Another threat," he said, his voice tense. "File a report with the police," Amanda advised. "And Elliot, be careful. Marcus is getting desperate." Elliot hung up and stared at the photo for a long moment. Desperation was dangerous. The next morning, Amanda arranged a meeting with the SEC to formally present the new evidence. Elliot arrived at the federal building early, clutching a folder of documents and feeling the weight of the moment. Inside the conference room, SEC officials reviewed the materials with grim expressions. They asked pointed questions, their pens scratching across notebooks as Elliot answered. "You've done a lot of legwork," one of them said. "But this is going to take time. Marcus and Theodore Whitmore didn't build their empires on honesty. They'll have defenses ready." "We're prepared for that," Elliot replied. "But the truth is on our side." After the meeting, Amanda pulled him aside. "You handled that well," she said. "But this is just the beginning. Once the SEC starts digging, Marcus will lash out harder than ever." Elliot nodded, bracing himself for what was to come. That evening, Elliot and June attended a town hall meeting at the community center. The room buzzed with energy as residents gathered to discuss housing issues and share their struggles. Carmen Lopez spoke first, recounting her battle with her landlord and thanking the Legal Aid Center for their help. "People like Elliot Hayes are fighting for us," she said, her voice strong. "And we need to fight for each other." Elliot sat in the back, overwhelmed by the support. The community's faith in him was both humbling and invigorating. As the meeting ended, June turned to him. "See," she said, her voice soft. "You're making a difference." Elliot smiled faintly. "It doesn't feel like enough sometimes." "It's more than enough," June said. "One step at a time, Elliot. You're changing lives." The next morning, the backlash from Marcus arrived in full force. An article appeared in a prominent newspaper, accusing Elliot of lying about the evidence and implying that he had doctored the documents provided to the SEC. Amanda called him almost immediately. "Don't panic," she said. "They're grasping at straws. This is Marcus trying to shift the narrative." But the damage was done. Elliot's phone buzzed nonstop with calls from reporters and messages from people questioning his integrity. That afternoon, a reporter cornered him outside the Legal Aid Center. "Mr. Hayes, care to comment on the accusations against you?" Elliot stopped, his jaw tightening. "The truth will come out," he said firmly. "That's all I have to say." Later that day, Amanda arranged a press conference to counter the smear campaign. Elliot stood at the podium, flanked by Amanda and several whistleblowers who had come forward to support him. "This isn't about me," Elliot said, his voice steady despite the nerves coursing through him. "It's about holding powerful people accountable for their actions. The evidence speaks for itself, and I will not be intimidated into silence." As he spoke, Elliot felt the weight of the fight bearing down on him. But the sight of June in the crowd, her quiet strength anchoring him, gave him the resolve to keep going. That evening, Elliot returned to his apartment, exhausted but determined. He found June waiting for him, a bag of takeout on the table. "You were incredible today," she said as they sat down to eat. "Thanks," Elliot said, though his voice was heavy. "But this feels like a never-ending battle." June reached across the table, her hand covering his. "The hardest fights are the ones worth fighting. And you're not alone, Elliot. Remember that." Her words brought a small smile to his face. As the week went on, the tide began to turn. The SEC announced that it had found enough evidence to launch a formal investigation into Marcus and Theodore Whitmore. News outlets shifted their focus to the corruption uncovered, and public opinion began to favor Elliot's side. But the threats didn't stop. One evening, as Elliot walked June home from the community center, a car followed them for several blocks before speeding away. "That was deliberate," June said, her voice steady but tense. Elliot nodded, his jaw tightening. "They're trying to scare us." June stopped and turned to him. "Let them try. We're not backing down." Her unwavering determination filled Elliot with renewed strength. Together, they continued walking, the lights of the city guiding their way. The tension had reached a fever pitch. The SEC's investigation into Marcus and Theodore Whitmore was in full swing, with whistleblowers stepping forward to corroborate Elliot Hayes' evidence. But for every small victory, Marcus countered with another attack. Elliot sat in the Legal Aid Center's conference room with Amanda Reeves, June, and a team of volunteers. The air buzzed with focused energy as they reviewed depositions, prepared responses to Marcus's legal filings, and coordinated media outreach. Amanda tapped her pen against the table. The SEC is closing in, but Marcus's lawyers are throwing everything they've got at us. They're challenging the authenticity of the financial documents and pushing hard to discredit Allen's testimony. We can't let them get away with it, Elliot said, his voice firm. We have to stay ahead of them. June, seated beside him, reached for his hand under the table and squeezed it. You've come too far to let them win now. Her quiet encouragement gave him the strength to keep going. 2 days later, Elliot was called to testify at an SEC hearing. The setting was stark and formal, the room filled with sharp-suited lawyers, government officials, and reporters. As he took his seat at the witness table, the weight of the moment pressed heavily on his shoulders. Mr. Hayes, one of the officials began, you've provided substantial evidence of financial misconduct involving Marcus Whitmore and others. Can you confirm the authenticity of these documents? Yes, Elliot said firmly. The documents were obtained from whistleblowers who worked directly under Mr. Whitmore. They've been reviewed and verified by multiple parties. The questioning continued for nearly 2 hours, probing every detail of Elliot's findings. Despite the pressure, Elliot maintained his composure, answering each question with precision. When the session ended, Amanda met him outside the building. You did well, she said. They can't poke holes in the truth, no matter how hard they try. The next morning, news broke that another former associate of Marcus had come forward, providing additional evidence of corruption. The story dominated headlines, further eroding Marcus's credibility. But the pressure didn't come without consequences. Later that day, Elliot received a call from Henry Adler, the whistleblower who had first stepped forward. They found me, Henry said, his voice shaking. Someone's been following me. I'm scared. Elliot. Elliot's grip on the phone tightened. Henry, listen to me. We'll get you protection. Don't back down now. You're a critical piece of this. Henry hesitated, then sighed. I'm not quitting, but I'm not sure how much more I can take. After the call, Elliot felt a surge of anger and frustration. Marcus was running out of options, and his desperation was putting lives at risk. That evening, Elliot and June met at her studio. The space, usually filled with the vibrant energy of her art, felt heavy with unspoken tension. He's going after everyone connected to this, Elliot said, pacing the room. Henry, the whistleblowers, even the Legal Aid Center. How far is he willing to go? June set down her brush and walked over to him. As far as he thinks he needs to. But that doesn't mean he'll win. Elliot stopped, his hands clenched at his sides. I'm tired, June. Tired of feeling like I have to fight every second just to keep my head above water. June placed her hands on his shoulders, her gaze steady. You've been fighting for all the right reasons, Elliot, and you're not alone in this. People see what you're doing. They believe in you. Her words, simple yet powerful, brought a sense of calm to the storm raging inside him. 2 days later, Amanda called with news that sent shockwaves through their team. Theodore Whitmore has agreed to cooperate with the SEC, she said. He's turning on Marcus. Elliot blinked in surprise. Theodore? Why now? Self-preservation, Amanda replied. He sees the writing on the wall, but is a game changer. With his testimony, Marcus doesn't stand a chance. The revelation felt like a breakthrough, but Elliot knew the fight wasn't over yet. The following week, the SEC held a public press conference to announce the findings of their investigation. Elliot, June, Amanda, and several whistleblowers attended, seated in the front row. The SEC official stepped up to the podium. After a thorough investigation, we have uncovered substantial evidence of financial misconduct, including embezzlement, money laundering, and fraud, orchestrated by Marcus Whitmore and other individuals. We are pursuing charges against all involved. The room erupted in murmurs as reporters scribbled furiously. As the conference ended, Elliot felt a wave of relief. The truth was finally coming to light. Outside the building, reporters swarmed him, shouting questions. Mr. Hayes, how does it feel to see your fight validated? Do you think Marcus will face prison time? Elliot held up a hand. This has never been about me. It's about accountability. I'm grateful to everyone who came forward to make this possible. That evening, Elliot and June stood on the rooftop of his apartment building, the city lights stretching out before them. You did it, June said softly. We did it, Elliot corrected, his voice filled with gratitude. I couldn't have done this without you. June smiled, her hand slipping into his. You've given people hope, Elliot. That's something no one can take away. As they stood together, the cool breeze carrying the sounds of the bustling city below, Elliot felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The fight wasn't over, but the tide had turned. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe in a brighter future, not just for himself, but for everyone they had fought for. The trial of Marcus Whitmore became the centerpiece of public discourse over the following months. As the evidence mounted, his carefully curated image crumbled. Theodore Whitmore's cooperation with the SEC was the final blow, exposing a network of corruption that stretched far beyond what Elliot Hayes had initially uncovered. For Elliot, the victory was bittersweet. He had stood against one of the most powerful men in the city and emerged victorious. But the fight had left scars, some visible, others buried deep. Now, with the trial nearing its conclusion, Elliot found himself at a crossroads. The constant grind of the legal battle had consumed his life, leaving little room for anything else. The question lingered in his mind. What comes next? One crisp spring morning, Elliot met June at the community center. The air was fragrant with blooming flowers, and sunlight filtered through the tall windows, illuminating her mural of interconnected hands. The center was alive with activity. Children gathered for art classes, families attended workshops, and the sounds of laughter filled the halls. June stood near the mural, organizing supplies for her next class. She looked up as Elliot approached, her face brightening. You're early, she said with a smile. I needed a change of scenery, Elliot replied, glancing around. This place feels different. It is, June said. The mural brought people together. They see it as a symbol of hope. Elliot nodded, his gaze lingering on the mural. You've created something incredible here, June. You've given this community a voice. She shrugged, but there was pride in her eyes. We both did. Your fight inspired people too, Elliot. You showed them that even the powerful can be held accountable. Later that day, Elliot attended the final court hearing in Marcus Whitmore's trial. The courtroom was packed with reporters, lawyers, and members of the public who had followed the case closely. As the judge read the verdict guilty on multiple counts, Elliot felt a rush of relief. Justice had prevailed. Outside the courthouse, Amanda Reeves found him. It's over, she said, a rare smile breaking across her face. You did it, Elliot. We did it, he replied, shaking her hand. Reporters swarmed as they stepped outside, cameras flashing and questions flying. Mr. Hayes, how does it feel to see Marcus Whitmore brought to justice? Elliot paused, choosing his words carefully. This case wasn't about me. It was about accountability and integrity. I'm grateful to everyone who stood up and fought for the truth. In the weeks that followed, life slowly began to settle. The Legal Aid Center saw a surge of support, with donors stepping in to fund new initiatives. Elliot continued volunteering, helping tenants fight unjust evictions and advocating for systemic change. But he knew it was time for something more. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Elliot invited June to his apartment. She arrived with a bottle of wine and her signature warm smile. What's the occasion? She asked, setting the bottle on the table. Elliot gestured to the small stack of papers on his desk. I've been thinking about what comes next. The fight with Marcus is over, but there's still so much work to do. I want to start a nonprofit and organization that provides legal support to people who can't afford it. June's eyes lit up. That's amazing, Elliot. Have you thought of a name? Not yet, he admitted. But I want it to stand for something meaningful, something that reflects what we've been through. June picked up one of the papers, scanning the outline he'd drafted. You're building something powerful here. It's like your own phoenix rising from the ashes. Elliot smiled. Maybe I'll call it the Phoenix Project. June grinned. Perfect. Over the next few months, Elliot poured his energy into building the Phoenix Project. With Amanda's guidance and support from the Legal Aid Center, he secured funding and hired a small team of dedicated lawyers and advocates. June, meanwhile, continued her work at the community center, launching a new series of art programs for at-risk youth. Her dream of creating an art studio was slowly becoming a reality. Though their paths were different, their bond grew stronger. Late-night brainstorming sessions turned into quiet moments of reflection, and Elliot found himself looking forward to every conversation, every shared victory. One evening, Elliot and June attended a gala at the community center to celebrate the unveiling of her latest mural. The event was lively, filled with laughter and music, and the mural, a vibrant depiction of a phoenix rising from the flames, was the centerpiece of the night. As they stood together, watching the crowd admire her work, June turned to Elliot. I think this is just the beginning for both of us." Elliot looked at her, his chest tightening with emotion. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, June. You've been my anchor through all of it." She smiled softly. "And you've reminded me that no matter how broken things seem, they can be rebuilt." For a moment, the noise of the gala faded, and it was just the two of them. "June," Elliot began, his voice unsteady, "I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want you to be part of it." Her eyes shimmered as she reached for his hand. "I'm not going anywhere, Elliot." As the night wore on, Elliot and June stood beneath the mural, surrounded by friends and supporters. The city stretched out beyond the windows, its lights twinkling like stars. For the first time in years, Elliot felt at peace. The road ahead was uncertain, but he was no longer afraid. He had found purpose, love, and a renewed sense of hope. And as he looked at June, he knew they would face whatever came next together. The fight against Marcus Whitmore had been long and grueling, but it had forged something greater than victory. It had created a new beginning not just for Elliot, but for everyone who had been part of the journey. The Phoenix Project was more than an organization. It was a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even in the face of darkness, people could rise again. And so, as the city pulsed with life around them, Elliot and June embraced the promise of a brighter tomorrow, ready to write the next chapter of their story. The fight against Marcus Whitmore had been long and grueling, but it had forged something greater than victory. It had created a new beginning not just for Elliot, but for everyone who had been part of the journey. The Phoenix Project was more than an organization. It was a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even in the face of darkness, people could rise again. And so, as the city pulsed with life around them, Elliot and June embraced the promise of a brighter tomorrow, ready to write the next chapter of their story. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more inspiring tales of resilience, hope, and transformation, make sure to like and subscribe. Your support helps keep these stories alive. See you in the next one.